What's up everybody, my name is Kathleen, former PCT thru hiker, avid Pacific Northwest day hiker, and the hungry hiker here on YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about one of my all-time favorite topics, food. And more specifically, I want to talk about the food that I had in my food bag on my backpacking trip while section hiking the Pacific Crest Trail this summer. For 8 days, I hiked on Section L here in Washington from Rainy Pass up to the Canadian border at the northern terminus, and then turned around and head back to Rainy Pass. So it was a total of 122 miles in 8 days. In this video, I'm going to talk about all the food that was in my food bag, the gear that I used in my cooking system, and the meals that I prepared on trail. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that bell icon to get notified anytime I add new videos. All right, let's get into my food bag, shall we?
Hands down, my section hike on the PCT this summer was the longest food carry I'd ever done for any backpacking trip. Up until this trip, the longest food carry I'd ever done was a 7-day stretch in the High Sierra on the PCT in 2018. So why was my food bag so heavy for this trip? My section hike on the PCT this summer was along Section L in Washington, starting at Rainy Pass off of Highway 20, where I'd hike northbound along the PCT for 62 miles until I reached the northern terminus at the Canadian border. Since the Canadian border was closed, it would be illegal for me to walk into Canada and head into Manning Park. When I got to the border, I camped there for the night and then headed back towards Rainy Pass the next morning along the PCT southbound, making this trip a total of 122 miles over 8 days. From Rainy Pass to the Canadian border and back, there aren't any resupply options because this section of the trail doesn't go into any towns. This meant I'd need to pack all 8 days worth of food with me. Actually, it was more like 9 to 10 days worth of food because I always pack at least an extra day's worth of food. They say you pack your fears, and one of my fears is going hungry out on trail. My resupply strategy was simple: pack it all with me from day one and carry everything I needed the entire time I was out there. I was pretty motivated to eat the food I had in my pack because the more I ate meant the lighter my food bag would be. Let's talk about the gear I carried for my cooking system on trail. First, my DIY stove koozie. Since the cooking I do on trail requires boiling water and the stove I use isn't insulated, I needed a way to insulate my stove so I could cook my meals on trail as efficiently as possible without using too much fuel. With my DIY stove koozie, I'm able to cook my meals using less fuel because the koozie helps trap the heat inside my pot. I'll put a link to a video in the description below showing you how to make your own DIY stove koozie. My cooking pot and stove. I recently made the switch from using a Jetboil to the Snow Peak Trek 900 titanium cook set, which is my pot, and my stove, which is the BSR 3000T ultralight titanium backcountry stove. I have been loving this combination for a few reasons. First off, it's lighter by 3.3 ounces. My Snow Peak cooking pot and the BSR stove together weigh a total of 8.7 ounces, whereas the Jetboil Micromo I was using weighed a total of 12 ounces. My new cooking system saves me space in my pack. I prefer using the medium size or the 8.11 ounces fuel canister on trail because I'm always paranoid I'll run out of fuel on trail. The medium-sized fuel canister fits perfectly inside the Snow Peak cooking pot. With my Jetboil stove, I'd have to store the medium-sized fuel canister separately, which took up more space in my pack. And cost. Altogether, the Snow Peak cooking pot and BSR stove cost $70. The Jetboil Micromo runs about $150. My new cooking system is $80 cheaper than the Jetboil. With saving weight, saving space in my pack, and saving money, the switch to my new cooking system this year was a no-brainer for me. My cooking system isn't as sturdy as my Jetboil was. I have to be careful to set it up on a fairly flat surface or run the risk of toppling it over while cooking, which I did during lunch on day 2 of my trip. Also, this wouldn't be as good of a cooking system in the cold winter weather like the Jetboil would, but for long distance hiking during the spring, summer, and fall where every ounce counts, this system works perfectly for me. It also boils water in the same amount of time as the Jetboil does, which is super quick.
Another piece of gear in my cooking system is my eating utensil. This is my Trail Magic spork. So on one end there's a spoon, on the other end there's a fork. There's also a little knife here. I have no idea what brand this is. This was actually part of Trail Magic that I received on trail heading to the northern terminus. So day 2, I'm guessing sometime at lunch, I had a long titanium spoon that I really enjoyed. I really love that spoon, and I lost it. I must have set it down on a rock that was the same color and then forgot to put it in my pack and didn't notice it was gone until the next time I sat down to eat and realized that I didn't have it and had to use a tent stake to eat my food. How this came to be was I was talking to a couple hikers on trail who had just come back from the northern terminus, and we were talking about the trail, talking about our adventures up until that point. They were heading southbound, I was still heading northbound, and I mentioned how I had misplaced my spoon somewhere, and one of the hikers asked me if I needed a spoon, and I said, yeah, I mean, I'm using a tent stake. And he's like, well, would you like one? And I said, well, sure. Do you have an extra spoon? And he's like, actually, I do. And I said, well, is it easy to get to? And he pulled it right out of his pocket and gave me this. He's like, yeah, I have multiple, and I'm so happy to give this to you. So this is a very special piece of gear because it was Trail Magic gifted to me from another hiker, and it meant I didn't have to use a tent stake for the rest of my trip. So that's pretty awesome.
I also like to pack with my cooking system the REI Multi-Towel Light Microfiber Towel in small, which I use to clean out my pot, and it dries fairly quickly. To store my entire cooking system in, I use the 3-liter Osprey Ultralight bag. For my food bag, I store all of my food on trail in a 20-liter Osprey Ultralight dry sack. Check the description below to get more details about the gear in my cooking system. I'll also include a link to my entire gear list for this trip on lighterpack.com. If you want to learn more about all of the other gear I brought with me and used on this trip, you'll want to check out my PCT 2020 hiking gear video. When putting together a backpacking food list for any long distance hike, not only will you want to pack the food you enjoy, but also keep calories in mind. The more miles you hike, the more calories you're going to burn. A long distance backpacking trip is not the time to go on a diet. You're going to need the calories if you want to put in the miles. My long distance backpacking diet is the only time where I get to eat like a 15-year-old boy and still manage to lose weight. Here's how I ate throughout the day during my trip. Interesting fun fact about me: I don't drink coffee, and I also don't like to cook breakfast in the morning. I'd rather sleep in and eat something quick and on the go that doesn't require any sort of cooking. My ideal breakfast is something in a bar form, so for this trip I packed my Holy Moly breakfast bars, one for each day, which are about 400 calories per bar. Depending on how hungry I got and how soon I'd get hungry after breakfast, I might stop for a second breakfast. Second breakfast for me usually was one of my snacks. My snacks for this trip included cheddar and beef stick combos, which are 200 calories a pair. I brought 2 packages of these for my trip and I only needed one. A Snickers bar, which are about 250 calories a piece. I brought 8 bars with me on this trip and only ate 4 of them on trail. A handful of almonds, a handful of cashews, chocolate covered pretzels, something salty and crunchy like a handful of Gardettos, a packet of my favorite cookies, the dark chocolate covered Loos, or a handful of sour gummy bears from the bulk section at the grocery store. For lunch, I try to keep it easy and do a non-cooked meal unless I was at a water source. For non-cooked lunch options, I brought fancy hard cheese, peppered salami and crackers, chicken tortilla wraps. I usually had 2 per serving, and the buffalo style flavor is my favorite. Dinner was the one meal of the day where I would cook because I had more time and was usually at a water source. My dinner options for this trip included a packet of ramen with peanut butter. The peanut butter makes the consistency of the ramen a little thicker, and it turns it into a backcountry pad thai. For this trip, I brought powdered peanut butter to save space and weight, and I loved it. Chicken stovetop with a packet of coconut oil for more calories. Chicken flavored Knorr rice sides with a packet of coconut oil for more calories. A couple of my dehydrated backcountry spaghetti meals. And a Mountain House Chili Mac freeze-dried meal repackaged in a Ziploc bag to save space. Sometimes if I didn't feel like cooking dinner, I'd opt for one of my non-cooked meals like cheese, salami, and crackers, or a chicken wrap. Throughout the day, I'd replenish the salt I'd lose through my sweat from hiking all day and carrying a heavy pack with my electrolytes of choice for this trip, blue powdered Gatorade. I packed out 9 servings for this trip. I'd make a batch in the Gatorade bottle I brought with me each time I stopped for water. The blue powdered Gatorade was always a nice change of pace from drinking something other than water all the time, and a treat I'd save for myself after doing a big climb. I brought a few packets of the Emergency with me, but ended up only using one of these during my trip.
Pack it in, pack it out. So whatever you bring with you, you must take with you. There's no leaving trash on trail. There's no garbage cans out in the backcountry. It is your responsibility as a day hiker, overnight backpacker, through hiker to pack out your trash. Leave Mother Nature more beautiful, more pristine than you found it. How I like to store my trash on trail in my pack is by using a Ziploc bag. And so usually I'll use a used Ziploc bag that I had stored some food in. So once I eat the food, then I'll turn that into a trash bag, and I'll just collect my trash in the trash bag and then close up the bag and then store my trash bag on the outside of my pack in the mesh pocket. And then as soon as I get into town or a trailhead or when I come across a garbage, first thing I do is I throw out my trash bag because these things can get pretty gross after a few days. Don't forget to check out the description below for details on the gear that I use in my cooking system, as well as a link to my lighterpack.com gear list for this trip. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, everyone. Happy trails and keep on trekking.